Yo, what's up, everybody? Dr. D here. So today we're going to be talking about longevity and death prediction, and it's a hot topic. More and more people want to understand how to live longer, etc. But also, it's a topic that science is just starting to get some grasp on. And I had questions about this topic, and we'll continue to have questions as it's an ever-developing topic. So what do? I surround myself with really, really smart people. And so today I have here our attorney, Chase Howard, healthcare attorney, one of the smartest guys I know for sure, and the smartest guy in his space. And then I have Ryan Smith here, founder of True Diagnostic. He is literally an advisor to me. I call him with all kinds of biological questions and lately even like life questions and so forth, but whatever. He's just a stud all around the biological sciences, and True Diagnostic is truly a specialized company in death prediction, and he's the founder. So that just tells you. So guys, thanks for being here today. Super excited to spend this time with you guys, and maybe if Chase, you just give a quick intro on yourself, and then Ryan, and then we'll jump into it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dr. D. It's always a pleasure to chat with you and share info. So you mentioned I'm a lawyer. I'm a healthcare attorney. I based out of Florida, but I work with clients all over the country, and I work with clients that are in the alternative medicine space. So there's traditional physician practices, healthcare practices, hospitals, things like that, and we work with those as a firm. But I focus a lot of my practice on clinics that are doing things that are maybe in the gray area or aren't as widely accepted or recognized just yet, or they're just cash pay elective. So they're kind of these alternative practices. So that's how we got looped in, and that's where I kind of place my advice from a business perspective, how to run and operate it, and then regulatory, how to stay out of trouble, how to do the right things or understand what laws are there, what your options are, and then the risk that comes with those options.
Yeah, and that's why I call you so much on a
Every
daily
day.
basis, every day. And then Ryan, if you could be so kind, just
Yeah.
I know you have a laundry list of accolades, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, you're being too kind, I think. I think that, for this discussion mainly, I'm approaching this as founder of True Diagnostic. For those of you who don't know what True Diagnostic is, we are an epigenetic methylation testing company, which is really trying to quantify the aging process and actually do death prediction as well as a lot of other disease-related predictions as a result of this new biomarker of epigenetic methylation. And so we're constantly involved in new research to create new and better ways to interpret these markers for health. One of them is definitively in death prediction, which I think will be one of our major topics today, in addition to biological age. And so I'm going to be talking about some of the science behind what we do as a company and what the field does to a greater degree, so that we can then talk about maybe some of the weaknesses, where this is going in the future, and really help everyone navigate appropriately.
Awesome. Yeah, and then I'm just going to be 100% transparent with all our listeners. I basically started to have some questions in regards to this, and I've been working with these two pretty much since I started my career as a business person in the field. And, I basically called Ryan because I was having a lot of our clients come in and start to ask questions in regards to how valid is the test? Why is this other test that I did apparently better? Or I've heard that you can predict age to a shorter amount of time, right? To a month, to a year, to all these different questions. And, and that's when I started calling Chase and Ryan and said, wait, hold on. I'm hearing this about the market. So there are some questionable things out there that we're not going to address directly, but we're going to give you guys facts about how this really works. So Ryan, maybe if you can address what biological age really is, what is this whole thing of, how old really am I genetically? And for those of you that don't understand, there's a thing about how many birthdays you've sang, that's not your real age. Now we're starting to understand that there's a way to actually understand your age, how old you are biologically, and also, and what everybody's super interested in as well is, when am I going to die? Right? So Ryan, if you could shed a little bit of light, what is that notion in more detail, please?
Yeah, certainly. And before I get into, the difference between biological and chronological age, I really want to emphasize why it's important. Why is measuring this, such an important part of healthcare, both now and in the future? And it's because age itself, this idea of even chronological age, is the number one predictor of all negative outcomes of disease and death. There's if you look at even the top three causes of death over in 2020, which was COVID-19, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. The biggest risk factor for each of those, and by a large margin, is the age of the patient. The age of the patient is the number one risk factor for all chronic disease and death, and that's why quantifying this process is so important. But this brings up this process of how do we quantify it? And most people, if you ask them how old they are, they would give you their birth date, right, to tell you how many years they've traveled around the sun. But from a biological perspective, that's not necessarily important. And I think most people can identify with this from whenever they look at someone who looks like they're in their 50s and they find out that they're 70, right? There's this idea of phenotypic variation, how individuals differ in their aging rates. And this is not defined by, the number of, sort of circles around the sun. It's really defined by how our bodies function, these molecular processes. And so I think we all could guess someone's age if we looked at them, right? We would have an idea. And that's even a better idea of biological age than even, chronological age, because that actually tells you how a person is functioning. And that's really what we care about, is at the end of the day, how is their body functioning? And we want to really stop that negative progression, that slow decline, which we categorize as aging.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm actually going to take that one from you. I really like that, what you just said in regards to, you can almost tell what the person's biological age just by looking at them. Something so simple, but I never really thought about it. But and then Chase, as it relates to, everything that Ryan just said, and some, right, a lot about these claims that you hear out there, for people that own other clinics or even future healthcare professionals that in the future want to get into this. What are the cautions, and even as consumers, how do you vet out where this is actually being portrayed in a correct fashion? Say I'm a consumer, right, and I want to know my biological age, but honestly, I'm a very scared person who would buy new things, et cetera, when I don't understand them. How can a consumer maybe understand this better, or a clinician also understand how to maybe actually even portray this to the consumer?
Yeah, and I think there's two views there, right? There's from the consumer and from the clinician who's offering it or selling it. When you're a consumer, especially in the healthcare space, you expect that what you're being sold or given or treated with is something that's, gone through testing, rigorous testing, is predictive, is safe, has, outcomes, right? It's not on the consumer necessarily to really understand the science or medicine behind it. It's on the, provider and everybody, up the line to have done the testing and do the things that they need to do to ensure that when it gets to the consumer, it's clear what the consumer should get out of it or can expect out of it. So really, do your research, ask your providers, do some, online searches, things like that. Ask for sources that support, you promised me X, how do I know that that's actually going to happen? And then on the flip side, for the clinician who's offering it, there's a lot of three-letter agencies out there. There's FDA, FTC, BOM, Board of Medicine, BOP, Board of Pharmacy, DOH, on federal and state levels. So you're not just selling a product and hoping it doesn't hurt somebody, but when you're selling a product, you're hoping that when you sell it and how you sell it is in line with what these three-letter agencies want you to say, or don't want you to say. So, it's really imperative that you do some research on, other testing that's been done, or just, really watch your language, right? Making extreme promises of this could never happen, or this is guaranteed. I mean, that's like red flags automatically for three-letter agencies. So language is really probably the most important thing, followed by, safety, obviously, of whatever it may be. And in this case, testing is, are you going to actually test what you're promising you're going to test, or is it, made up, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I also wanted to talk about one of I should say, the mixture of the traditional medicine world with what we're doing now in terms of biological aging, which is there's one important caveat here, which is right now, most of those governmental agencies don't recognize health, or I should say, aging as a disease directly. It doesn't have some of these, diagnostic codes we would traditionally consider, and that's changing. Even in, 2 years ago, the World Health Organization added a diagnostic code to talk about aging as a reason for any particular disease. And so we're starting to see some of that movement. But right now, when we're talking about quantifying the aging process, it can be hard to answer those questions or do your validation because right now it's a little bit out of that government purview. And so I think one of the things that I'd really like to do today in our discussion is to talk about some of the ways that I would go about vetting these individual, therapies, even though they're sort of outside of this regulatory behavior for now. I don't think they'll be that way for long. And so sort of talking about sort of that caveat and how we can, sort of help empower anyone who's listening today to be able to vet their therapies or vet their testing a little bit better is something I definitely have as a goal.
Oh, absolutely. Um, so Ryan, if piggybacking off of that, was how would a consumer vet, what the product is, and even understand, okay, am I doing a proper test? Are the promises being made to me accurate, or am I just getting here a heave ho kind of deal?
Certainly, and one of the is to sort of go into that. I also want to talk maybe about a little bit about the history of biological age measurements, because they've been around for even over 100 years now. Even in the 1920s, people were telling people that their biological age was their chronological age plus 1 year for every pack per day they smoked. Right, so really crude measurements, and so this has been happening for a while because we know this process is important. Right, and so it's been going on a long time, but throughout the years, we've seen better ways to measure this process. The issue goes to how we define aging. Aging is probably from a textbook definition considered this progressive loss of function with age. So basically, deterioration of our body with age. But the issue is how do we quantify that? Right? What are we measuring? As sort of you were talking about, Dr. D, even the way that we can look at people, and sort of guess that we guess that by things we see on their face, right? By their muscle mass, maybe how they move and their stature, probably by their if they have gray hair or they have wrinkles on their face, right? So those are what we call these phenotypic outcomes. But the aging process is very, very complex, and so we're going to be adding more and more of those features into a larger model to really measure all of these different aging deteriorations that happen. But the way that, regardless of how you're measuring it, the best way to prove that it's effective is by looking at accelerations in this process, where people who are said to be older would then have worse outcome history. So they would be more likely to have a negative event happen to them. Some things like cardiovascular disease, cancer, all of these things we know happen with age. And so that is the really the main output and how I would say in our industry really define the efficacy of a test is it able to predict outcomes? Is it able to tell you what's going to happen better than any other test? And so that is a fundamental part, I think, of this testing, where you want to look at how it's been validated. So whatever method you're using to test, is it predictive of outcomes? I think that's the number one thing that I would encourage everyone to look at with this type of testing.
Got it. Got it. So, and when you say predictive of outcomes, you're saying like the cardiovascular events and other say
Yeah.
consequences to one's health.
Yeah, and that's the complicated nature because aging affects every disease risk. There's not a single disease which is not connected to aging. And so we want to, when we're reviewing aging, we want to look at the whole constellation of aging symptoms. But the reason that people die most often, or the reason that they have, morbidities, or is because of, a certain number of diseases that are most prevalent. And that's going to be things like stroke and cardiovascular disease. It's going to be things like cancer, and it's going to be things like lung disease like COPD and some of those other outcomes. So with an aging test, you can show that you're able to predict those outcomes better in people who are advanced aging, or you're going to be able to tell them that they're protected from those outcomes if they're at negative aging rates. Then that is a good test. The most predictive test is really going to be the most accurate test.
Got it. So I'm going to ask you both the question. The $1 million question, I think, that people ask the most and are more interested in when you get into this kind of stuff. How good are these tests? How close can it tell me, oh, when am I going to die? So do you know if I'm going to die the exact date? No. And then, okay, not the date, but within a month, within a year, within 5 years, what is it safe to say? One of you go first. I don't know.
I'll take it first, Ryan, if that's okay, and then you can talk about the rest of it. But what's safe to say? Nothing. Don't promise that you can say you're going to die in X amount of days, months. Unless you're premeditated murder, right? If you ask me and I plan on murdering you, I'm going to pick the day, right? That's the only way someone should tell you. Here's exactly when you're going to die. And why is that? Not because they're not God, but you make a promise to someone when it comes to anything in medicine, and we go back to those 3-letter agencies that say, "Cool, show me where we, the FDA, approved some sort of test that says that." Because it's not just, oh, I just want to learn, when I might die, how much time I have left, whatever. But it's, oh, now I know I have 10 years left. So what type of medical treatments am I going to go seek out now? What type of other experimental or non-FDA approved treatments am I going to go seek out now? So now you've put a patient on the path of, just destruction of, what can I get? What can I gather? What can I put in my body? What can I do that I probably don't need to, avoid this 10-year mark, right? That's it's all an issue when it comes to those 3-letter agencies.
Yeah, certainly. And to I think go a little bit further. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Well, no problem. I think that one of the questions right now is what's the most important thing to predict in when we talk about aging, and a large amount of people would say that death is that number one value, because ultimately that's what we want to avoid, is the worst outcome. And so the ability to predict death, I want to make one note, is really exciting, because we can predict death right now better than we've ever been able to do it before. We this is a sort of a pinnacle of our ability to predict death. But with that being said, it's still very, very difficult. I always point back to a study from 2019, which is one of the most well-powered studies for death prediction that's ever been done, and it used almost 45,000 patients. It was performed in the Netherlands, and they only had right around an 80% accuracy to predict death in the next 5 to 10 years. And so that was in 2019, not that long ago. And outside of 10 years, they had no predictive ability. And even within that period of 10 years, they were generally only around 80% effective at saying, is someone going to die or are they not? And so, with that being said, this is still limited. In terms of, we're not going to be able to give you an exact date. We're probably not even going to get close to 3 years. But now, with new advances in technology and these biomarker measurements, we're getting much more accurate. And so we're slowly reducing that margin of error from what might have been over 10 years in 2019 to now being, even with some of the things that we hope to publish with Harvard in the very near future, to maybe within 8 to 9 years of prediction, and being very, very accurate with that prediction. So we're seeing it advance, but even where we are right now is, I think, worthy of note. We're better than we've ever been, but it still needs to go a long way to where it's going to sort of change lifestyle and prescribing habits.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah, and if I can, I think you're saying a lot of really important things there, Ryan. And to take it a step further, it's important, to be able to have tests like this, because, there are times where I think it's appropriate, right? You want to make sure you can treat a patient and help them, extend their life, or at least, get through what they need to get through. So when you are saying these things or offering these things, it's important to say, here's how good it is, right? 80%, 90% accurate, and here's the time frame. But we do this because we want to focus on kind of the next plan, right? So if there's options and plans to kind of add on after that to treat what you're doing, right? If you don't change what you're doing, if we can do these things, then that can increase your chances of living longer, right? I think the problem is we just see a lot of people that put stuff out there, and then it creates the fear of I've got exactly 10 years to live, and now I have to do everything, right? So, I think the more info you can give and, even solutions with it, I think that helps and that's safe. But again, speaking in, extremes and, absolutes is really what can be troublesome.
Right.
And and
And
I
and
would.
I'll tell you. Go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in there once more with another, I would say, interesting fact, which is that I think right now, widely accepted, these epigenetic predictors of death, algorithms which like GrimAge, named for the Grim Reaper, for instance, are the best that they've ever been, and probably the standard for predicting death at this moment. But they still can't do it within, necessarily a period of 10 years. But we are seeing improvements. And so you're going to see this in your daily life. Right now, insurance companies, life insurance companies, are already using this as a metric to base how much your premium should be for life insurance. And so with that being said, this is going to be more and more ingrained as the technology gets better. And it's definitely worth spending some time to figure out which one is the best and what can actually tell you about your health and all of its limitations. And I think that fundamentally, the one thing that you should be looking for is this method published? Is it out there in the literature? Is it peer reviewed where other people have had the opportunity to look at it? Those are things you want. I always liken it to going to a fortune teller because you can go to a fortune teller, maybe have someone read your palm, but you're committing to trusting them. And you shouldn't necessarily have to have that level of trust with these medical tests, right? You should have some level of scientific evidence, and those studies are what give you that. And so I always say, don't trust the fortune teller, trust the data, and that requires published studies.
Absolutely. And that, I think right there, I'll just summarize to, again, some of our listeners, basically, I mean, to say any test can predict death to a decade, like we said, there's a rate of inaccuracy still. It will start to improve, and Ryan is being humble here. He's talking about the advancements in the industry, but he's pretty much one of the main people advancing the industry. So he knows what he's talking about, and he's in current studies with really strong institutions, some of our biggest institutions in our country. And I mean, and there you have it. It's not possible to predict to months, to days, to weeks. That we're not there yet. Maybe one day. And life insurance companies would be all over this if that was the case. And they're starting to actually come into that. And point number two is, if you're considering doing this or any medical treatment or study, and we have Chase here on this podcast, which is he's dedicated, especially to alternative practices, etc. There still should be studies. Just because it's alternative, people don't understand that sometimes. Just because it's alternative or new, etc., everything should have studies. Period. End of story. You should not be, I think, putting your body, your family, your family's body, your psyche, anything through treatments or et cetera that there are not published studies. So everything we're talking about here and some of the methodologies, they're published. And Ryan, like I said, thanks for everything you're doing for the industry. You're really pushing that. So Ryan, and if you can, maybe why don't we talk about now a little bit, go a little deeper into these different tests. The other day, you and I, we had a long call about the first generation, like the Horvaths, and then the second generation, third generation, and we're soon to move into the fourth generation type of clocks. And what are these clocks, and and then just maybe go from there a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the history also talks about the limitations. So it's important to know because there are more and more tests out there that are measuring biological age. Right now, you can buy one from companies like Thorne, which will measure blood-based biomarkers, or Inside Tracker, for instance, which will do blood-based biomarkers, or you can do methylation testing, which is DNA biomarkers. So there's a lot of different ways you can measure this in the body. But the advent of these epigenetic clocks added something that had previously not been seen, which is a high level of precision and a high level of prediction. They sort of changed the way that we look at this process, and it was a unique biomarker. And so that started in 2013 with Dr. Steve Horvath from UCLA, who I still go on record saying I think he'll end up being nominated for Nobel Prize for this one day, because of how it changes, and revolutionizes the way that we treat health. And to speak to that point as a sort of a tangent, Dr. D, I think you mentioned that if insurance companies would hop on this immediately if they could test it, and I think that's a really good point. Just to give you an idea of the economic value, if everyone in the world were to increase lifespan by, or I should say, everyone in the United States were to increase lifespan by just 1 year, the U.S. would save over $256 billion in a single year, and that's just by 1 year of life extension. So you can imagine that these companies are motivated. There are companies out there that are motivated on solving this issue because of the massive population level impact it could have. If you were to do 10 years, it would be over $1 trillion. I mean, this is a big population level health impact, and so the people are trying to search this out, and it really started, I think, with the revolution in 2013, where Dr. Horvath created this way to be able to tell someone their age by looking at the DNA. And at first, that was used in things like dating refugees, or to see if they were adults and then therefore eligible for asylum, or looking at crime scene data. But these clocks have advanced, and so these initial clocks were trained to predict the chronological age of a patient. The problem with that, though, is that the better that those clocks got, the closer they got to just having your birthday, which we already talked about is not what we care about. It's not this chronological measurement we want to measure. It's a biological signal. And so these second clocks, we're using artificial intelligence and computer learning. We're taking information about how people aged and the phenotypes of their aging. So things like, their muscle mass, things like their cognitive abilities, things like other biomarkers like telomere length, or, even their cholesterol. These things give a better functional picture of how we're aging. And so these clocks now, these second and third generation clocks, as we would have it, are not at all trained to chronological age. And so if you're really trying to vet epigenetic clocks, I would say that really first generation clocks are outdated. Dr. D, you and I talked about maybe some of the problems you have with those first generation clocks that prevent them from being extremely useful. One of those problems is they don't respond to interventions we already know beneficially affect biology, which is a huge issue. I know that, if you're using this test on your own person and you're doing all the things the right way, and then you see your age increase, that can be really disheartening.
That happened to me. So I'm actually, and I don't mind putting it out there, that happened to me. I'm like, what the heck? And I live by this, and supplementation and so forth. And you remember, I'm like, what the heck? Why is my age going up? But then on my, I'm going to mention here a new term or new word for our listeners, in my duodenine pace, which is more accurate, and we'll talk about that in a second. My rate of aging is actually going down, which is great. But go ahead, Ryan, still on the generation of these clocks.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good segue, because these third generation clocks, like the duodenine pace, that is a clock which is better because it's been trained in a different way. So instead of trying to predict age, it's actually looked at the same individuals across their lifespans to look at all of these different functional tests. And as a result, it's more predictive, and it's more accurate than our other testing. So for instance, that 2013 clock created by Horvath, if you saw one standard deviation increase in that testing, it would give you right around a 2% increased risk of mortality, or a 2% risk of dying. Whereas if you saw one standard deviation change in the rate of aging, you would see a 63% increased risk of death. And so as we're comparing these clocks, and thinking which ones do we want to go with, we probably definitively want to go with the one that is explaining or predicting more of those outcomes, right? That's the one we want to prioritize because it's more important to our own health. And so that's how we know it's better, is it's more predictive of outcomes. And not only that, in the case of the duodenine pace, it also responds to things we already know beneficially affect our lifespan and health span. And so one of those things is caloric restriction. Eating fewer calories than you expend per day has been a very, very well documented therapy to improve lifespan, improve health span. But if you looked at it in some of those first generation clocks that are trained to chronological age, it actually goes up. Whereas these newer generation clocks like GrimAge and the duodenine pace, it actually goes down. And so that more matches with what we know clinically it should do, and means that we're definitely on track for better biomarkers.
We say that a lot to clients, when they get, uptight about their, Horvath, or first generation clocks not working. I say, listen, hold on. This didn't work for the calorie restriction studies, so it's okay. It didn't work. It's okay. It doesn't work for certain people, and then obviously it doesn't work for me. But you know, it's cool to see that every time these clocks are getting more and more and more precise. And then Chase, when do you think that, if ever, mainstream medicine will put this into use? Because like what Ryan was saying, I mean, just the financial benefits of actually us understanding this as a country, you know, I mean, the financial benefits for us are huge, right? And the just having the consciousness. I mean, let's face it, at the moment of us recording this right now, how many people in the United States know even of this possibility, of this topic?
Yeah,
imagine everybody being conscious that, you know what, I can measure this and I can actually apply some changes to my life to improve it and start tracking. Just, you know what I'm saying? That psychological factor of this, like, I mean, when do you think that we would actually take, this would be?
Here you go asking me to tell you. Here you go asking me to put a specific date on something when I'm telling people don't do that.
That's true.
Okay,
no,
fine. You know,
do you think mainstream medicine will ever accept this?
You know, it's hard to say yes or no, but you know, right now it's something that's so new and you know, it's on the forefront of medicine, but it has a lot of applications, like Ryan said. I mean, in life insurance and treatments, in overall health, if people know, you know, what they can or can't do based on, you know, their lifespan, that's really going to, I think, impact. I think we're already seeing a huge shift away from a lot of traditional healthcare. Whether that be because of distrust in, you know, traditional medicine, or, you know, more education, more exposure to alternatives. All of those things, you know, play into what happens next in medicine. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's not happening in 5 years, right? But, you know, the more and more that there's, you know, information out there, and it's good information that has, you know, studies, like you said, behind it, you know, people, I think, are going to start to realize, you know, hey, there are alternatives out there to the traditional. I get sick, I go to my doctor, they feed me drugs, and I pay for insurance, right? That's the model, right? So from a patient consumer side, you know, I think there's education and exposure, and that will start to shift and push. From the provider side, you know, I think it's a lot of the same, education and exposure. What's out there to help me deliver the best, you know, healthcare to my patients? You know, one, they've got to be willing and able to break away from, I think, what a traditional med school might just teach, and explore a little bit more and explore all options. And then, you know, two, there's got to be financial incentive to it, because unfortunately, that's where I think a lot of healthcare, it's driven to or pushed towards, is where's the money, right? So if there's no insurance backing behind these tests and treatments, you know, then you got to rely on a patient, you know, being willing and able to spend, you know, cash out of pocket on it. If there's, you know, insurance reimbursements for it, you know, then, you know, it becomes a little bit more available to people. And it's something that people are willing to spend on. Doctors are willing to, you know, sell, and, you know, other healthcare providers are willing to start, you know, accepting. So there's a lot of factors at play there. Some of it financial, some of it simply education, exposure.
Right. I personally think that this is something, this specific topic, and I never even told both of you, any of you guys this, but this is a very, I think, very interesting topic. Not even for traditional healthcare to be convinced of, but Wall Street, in especially, you know, for you know, America's America's C-suite, our corporations, right? The S&P 500 and those people running those companies. How interesting wouldn't it be to actually have these people champion this movement, and where we could actually, you know, because age. I mean, to me personally, I think Ryan will agree, it's the ultimate disease. It's the ultimate manifestation of everything that's going on with you, right or wrong, right? And we say this to a lot, you know, we do a lot of testing at our company, but I tell them all the time, I'm like, imagine you could have one number to kind of really give you the a summary of everything that you're doing. It's that one number that we're working for, because you look at all these blood markers, chemical toxicity, parasite toxicity, food additive toxicity, and gluten this and whatever this and my hormones this. But I'm like, imagine this one number that you can look at, this one darn number, and it gives you a summary. It's your bottom line. It's that how much money you have left over on your income statement kind of deal, et cetera. And I tell them about the rate of aging, where that's my kind of push to that. But when all the accumulation of all those efforts lead to that one number, imagine business people really taking a vested interest in improving those numbers on their own. I honestly believe that's kind of like a good way to start for this for the industry of measuring our age and quantifying our longevity. I don't know, but Ryan, I don't know if there's any efforts in that field already, or Chase, if you know of anything like that. But
I might start, and Chase, I think you probably speak to this with even some of the companies that you work with. But one important thing I think to mention is that it's always easier to prevent disease than it is to treat it, right? From a clinician's perspective, preventative medicine is a time saver, and it also prevents a lot of negative consequences from a health perspective. And one interesting thing about this as it relates to employers is that the majority of large employers are actually do their own health insurance, right? So they actually pay for their company's employees when they get sick. And so as a result, the healthier their patient population is, the better that, or I should say, the less they're going to spend on healthcare, but probably also, more productivity and some of these other, different metrics which are important to these companies. And so the other thing I should mention is that this idea of quantifying and measuring aging, or even turning back these clocks, is probably the largest area of investment. So one of the most well-funded startups of all time was created really with the sole purpose of reversing these epigenetic age clocks. It's called Altos Labs, funded by Jeff Bezos and Yuri Milner for a little over $3.2 billion as a startup, really just to reverse these clocks. And so you're seeing where there has been large interest from a corporate perspective, as well as a business perspective, to try and really treat aging as a disease in and of itself, and to reverse these processes. And so it's a change in the way that people think about it, which is exciting. I think that going back to everything Chase said, who knows whenever we'll have adoption at a federal or governmental level, when things will start to really change. But there's no denying that it's already exciting and that people are already moving. And so I think that hopefully the business sector will be a big one to push that.
Yeah, and Ryan, sorry, Dr. D, but Ryan, let's look at who's on here right now, right? We're three young guys. I think that it's our kind of generation, our age groups, that are going to question the traditional, model, right? And say, I'm paying all this money for health insurance, I got to pay more when I go there, and all I do is sit in a waiting room and then someone prescribes me something, right? That's not actually making me healthier. So I think there's a younger generation of the population that is tired of kind of what's traditional, and pushing that. And with that, they're starting companies, they're parts of companies. And you've got some people that are, older at the top, that have been around for a while, Bezos, right, that see the value in something like this and then want to invest in it, whether they invest in their own company or they're investing in, a younger group that sees it as an alternative. So I think there's a lot of momentum, pushing towards alternative medicine than from traditional. And so it may not be as long as we think. And it may happen, because of a younger generation pushing someone that's, in the older generation, and finds it to be, interesting and profitable, at the same time.
It's just something that I just remembered. I read this. I can't quote exactly where I read this, but it was recent. That Starbucks is actually spending more on employee health than they actually spend on coffee beans, which is about $300 million a year. They spend $300 million on coffee beans a year. They're spending more on employee health. So imagine having it, again, a test to quantify all that kind of stuff, et cetera. And then, but when will it get? And why do I say Wall Street? And they'd probably be quicker to take this into actually move with the movement with this kind of testing. Well, I read this actually in a book maybe last week. It's called The Miracles of Stem Cells by Dr. Christian Wild. And he in the book, they talk about how traditional medicine usually takes about 20 to 30 years to adopt even whatever's in traditional research. Anything that, for example, drugs and that get by, for example, there's a drug called Bicol that supposedly is suspected to have taken 31 lives. It's a type of statin, right? Or a drug like Vioxx, which took about 56,000 lives, and the amount of Americans we lost in the Vietnam War was 55,000. So think about that for a second. There has to be proper, of course, we really have to put things through their due diligence. So it does, we can't just be like, okay, let's go faster, let's go quicker, let's make sure this is, but as interesting as it may seem, like I just said, there's things that pass, even though it passes all these trials and so forth, and it still comes into our environment and still hurts us. But, I personally think in the let's say corporate America space would be a really good place to start, and where this is will go more into existence.
One thing about one of those three letter agencies, but it's a lot of the money game, right? Who has the most money to pay that 3-letter agency to review and test and authorize their product, etc. So you're right, Dr. D. It just because it's approved by one of those agencies doesn't mean that it's necessarily really the safest. It just went through that approval. Why? They had good money. So there's a lot of things out there that don't go through that. They can't afford it. They're young, they're new, whatever it may be. So certification by a 3-letter agency doesn't always mean it's the safest thing on the market. It just means it could be really safe, but they also had a lot of money. Right.
And that goes back into making sure everything has studies backing it. And Ryan, it's safe to say that all these tests that we're talking about, when properly done, et cetera, consumers can look up what these tests can do and how precise and accurate they are, what they can quantify, et cetera, correct?
Yeah, I should say they should be able to, but that's one of the big weaknesses in our industry is knowing how accurate these tests are, because the large majority of companies don't publish. And the reason being is they sometimes don't want to give away their secret sauce, so to speak. But I think in order to trust it, or in order for it to be a medical tool, you have to sacrifice that. I think that's what you give away in order. You have to make sure the information is vetted and publicly available. And usually, with the data that it takes to prove these things out, usually it's with an academic partner. So also look at that. If the studies are published with other universities, for instance, I think that's also another good mark of credibility.
Right. And, one thing that hopefully you and I will start working on together soon, I'd like to publish the work that we're doing. And I'd like to co-author something with you and some of your partners, because, we've been pretty successful in improving, especially the rate of aging. Mine, I'm going to brag here a little bit. Last year, I was aging at a rate of 85%. Every year that went by, right? Every year that goes by, you're supposed to age like about 100%, right? But I was aging at 85%, and now I'm aging at a rate of 75%. But Ryan, you said the record, and now I'm in the top 10th percentile, but you said the record of the company is 60%, right? 0.6, correct?
Correct. But I will mention that was for someone who was under 20 years of age. And it does go up as you get older. But I mean, 0.75 is something I'm jealous of for what it's worth. So definitely keep up the good work there.
Yeah, there we go. And this is something that, like I said, I do have a big focus on that personally. Like, how can I improve that number? Obviously all the other numbers are surrogates for me to get there and to improve that number. And, when giving this message to our clients, and Ryan, I think this month we might have done maybe 150 of your tests, or a past month, right? And where we give this, I mean, this is not a test that we do 1, 2, 3. We use this test very often. We're very cautious in explaining to the person like what those results mean, etc. Almost invariably, let's say 5 out of 10 people will ask us, okay, do you know when I'm going to die? We're like, no, we don't know. We don't know that answer. We can't give you that answer. How close? No, there's no how close or far. All we can tell you is how, your rate of aging with more, with a certain amount of certainty, which is that Dudinine pace rate of aging. So, and that's approved by both of you guys, right? We could say that.
Certainly. And I would like to mention, as well, though, that we've put in, 2 years of pretty hard work with some collaborators at Harvard to create a death predictor, which is hopefully the best ever published. And we're hoping to put this out in December or January. And I hope that we might be able to have another podcast update once we're there to talk about how that performed and what we can say definitively with that the new algorithm.
I was going to ask you, Ryan, if you wanted to comment a little bit on what's coming. I didn't want, because I've had conversations with you, but I don't know what you're comfortable in sharing, but there's some cool stuff coming, right? At least you could say that, right?
Certainly. And we've been working on this for a long time to capture the full picture of a human's aging process. And in order to do that, we've done a lot of testing in right around 2,000 individuals that include a lot of what we call omics, so different proteins and peptide levels in the blood, different metabolites, full genome sequencing, doing a large-scale epigenetics, and then also tracking them over the course of 60 years with over 75 clinical variables at up to 4 different time points. And so we hope to create an aging clock that is more biologically informed and more predictive than has ever been published. And so far, the data looks very good. We're really excited about it, and we're just shortly around the corner from a publication.
Awesome. And Chase, let me ask you a question. So, because I just thought of a study which I'm pretty sure Ryan's very familiar with, and Chase, I think I've mentioned this study to you in the past, the TRIM trial, right? I know Ryan talks a lot about that study. I talk about that too. So basically, the TRIM trial, for those of you guys that don't know, stands for thymic regeneration, immunorestoration, and insulin mitigation. And in this study, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, they tested 9 males, and they were able to prove, so here we go, careful words here, they were able to prove that they can reverse the epigenetic age of these individuals. And this is published in Forbes, not that that's a journal, but, provides some social proof. It's published in Nature. It was ultimately published in the Aging Cell. And you guys can look this up for our listeners, the TRIM trial. It's on clinicaltrials.gov. And it consists of 3 drugs that they used. One is DHEA, which it's naturally produced in your body, in your adrenal glands. The other one was growth hormone itself, which I particularly believe growth hormone is going to go through its renaissance, which it seems like we're starting now. And then the other one was a true drug, metformin. And they were able to show how they were able to reverse the epigenetic age of these people by 2 years. Now, and that's all over the place. Chase, so is it safe to say that we can the studies are showing signs that we can slow down the aging process or reverse aging versus saying, okay, obviously death predictions and so forth, okay, that's a no-no. But can we say that it's slow? We see my rate of aging is slowing down. Is that something safe to say according to the studies that we have, et cetera?
I think it's safe if you say it in a certain way and you can back it up in a certain way. So, it's also important to remember that there's probably, got to be certain context here, right? Are we aging so quickly because of what our current environment and lifestyle is versus, if our bodies just, did what we were supposed to do, we didn't put junk, food into our bodies, external stressors, things like that, what would our rate of aging be? So are we slowing down from where we were, or are we slowing down from where we put ourselves, right? So I think if you can educate, patients based on things like that, and then really educate them on the fact that there's a lot of studies out there. They're done by ABC. These people are legitimate because of whatever reason, right? Here's what those studies have started to show. As long as it's still not definitive, we can definitely do this. That's not science or medicine. Science and medicine isn't we have an answer and this is it and it's forever. It's constantly, trying to test that answer and over again. And at some point, people find out, well, you know what? Maybe we got it wrong 20 years ago, and this new test just showed us that this resolution was wrong, right? So as long as it's clear that there's ongoing studies still, there's still studies, they're peer reviewed, they're high level, etc. And based on that, here's what we know right now. I think that's always safe to say. I'm always cautious with definite answers and outcomes in medicine because there's always room for error, in anything you do in medicine and science. So you've got to hedge yourself with what you say to a patient because that's where liability wise you run into issues and you can't make a promise and not be able to back it up. So the safest way is let them know what's out there, what's not out there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yeah. To add to
Ryan,
that,
I don't know if you have any thoughts in regards to that.
yeah, definitely. The one thing I wanted to mention as well, whenever we're talking about public data, is that that patient base was only 9 people, which is a good start, right? I think that we absolutely need studies to start somewhere. But at the same time, whenever you're validating these publications, one of the biggest things you can do in order to validate it is, I should say, representation. So making sure it's diverse, so it works for a lot of people, which means it's more likely to work for you, and making sure that that sample size is large, making sure that it's a couple thousand patients, right, to make us confident that the results that we found, even though the results we found might be true results, does it hold up across everyone, right? And so making sure that we start to see some of those validation studies with large numbers of people, that's also a very important thing whenever you're looking to vet these different companies or different prediction methods.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, guys, I know we've been going at this for a bit. I think maybe it was a little bit of information overload for listeners. The first time touching this topic, and I know it is a little like, what? Wait, can imagine
play it on half speed.
Yeah, but it is important to shed some light on this topic, just because like anything that's new and it's, again, if done right, this is going to, I honestly believe, impact, our humanity and, the generations to come, and help us to improve a lot our lifestyle and things that we're actually living by, right? So I wanted to thank you guys today for taking the time with us, and taking me up on this to really provide people with some more detailed information and what are these tests, and especially, on the legal side, Chase, what you can expect somebody telling you, and if I may kind of give my 2 cents on that side. If somebody's making some big promises in the medical field to you, I'd just be cautious, and if there's no studies like Ryan was saying, and you should be able to offer studies on the therapies that you're indicating. I know, like Ryan said, some companies won't put out everything to, keep their secret sauce, let's say, but for the most part, that information should be out there. So I'm hoping this helps people today. And at the end of the day, if you're listening to this, you're interested in living a longer, happier life, more than likely. So let's keep at it. Let's keep getting healthier and informed. Information is the best thing that you can do. And if you've watched to this point, thank you so much. And guys, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.